Saturday afternoon. Welcome back to my teaching studio. Today I have another video on intervals. We're going to talk about super important intervals: perfect fourths, perfect fifths, diminished fifths, augmented fourths. All right, this is the one interval that we find everywhere in guitar playing: the perfect fourths and the perfect fifths. That we'll find it in power chords, we find it in the tuning of the guitar, and we also have the diminished fifth we're going to talk about too. So before we get too far into that though, the first thing that I want to talk about is I want to talk about the Pythagorean influence. I know if you've been following some of my videos in the past that I've already talked a little bit about Pythagoras' contribution to counting the intervals. Pythagoras was a Greek mathematician. He lived, I've read he lived 635 BC, but I also read that he lived around 900 BC. So I need to look that up so I can confirm. But we do know this: he lived a long time ago. And the term perfect intervals, they come from his studies. And so as being even fractions. So if I play the A string, and I have the string vibrate, the full length of the string, that's an A. So if I cut that in half directly in the middle, which is the 12th fret, that's a ratio of 2 to 1, and that makes the pitch twice as high. That is called the octave. So the next interval is called the fifth, and the fifth is 2/3, or a ratio of 3 to 2. And so the fifth is going to be here, and then the fourth is going to be a ratio of 4 to 3, which is going to be 25% of the length of the string. Now, you might ask, why do we call these thirds and fourths and fifths? If the fifth, this was a big question for me. If the fifth is 2/3 of the string, why do they call it the fifth? And why don't they just call it 2/3 of the string? It's a great question. Same thing with the fourth. If the fourth is 25% of the string, why not just call it 0.25? I'm going to try to answer that question. Okay, so to answer that question, this is what we need to know. We need to know how to count musical intervals. Also, one of the things that's very, very important that we need to know is what letters they used during Pythagoras' time. So I've talked about this before in some of my longer videos. So if you want a long explanation of this, go back to my long video on intervals. But what I'm going to talk about is I'm just going to mention what an interval is. So the interval is the measure of the distance between 2 points. So if I was to ask you, how far do you live from here? And if you said, I live 5 miles from here, you've answered the question. You've answered it by saying 5 miles. That's the interval. From here to where you live, it's a distance of 5 miles. You could also say, I live 15 minutes by car from here. That would also be another way, another interval. Intervals we use all the time in our daily lives: inches and feet, miles. We measure time. We use intervals all the time. So remember, a few minutes ago I had mentioned that it can be pretty confusing as far as the musical intervals go, because it would seem logical to me that if the musical interval was 2/3, they would call it 2/3. But they do not call it that. They call it a fifth. And here's why. Boom. So I have this chart right here, and this chart shows the letters that during the time of that Pythagoras was alive, that they used to name the notes in the music. So they only had the letters A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. They had not yet invented what we call the accidentals, which are sharps and flats. So they only used 7 letters. They didn't have any sharps and flats yet. So whenever they started counting their intervals, it was a very simple method. What they would do is they would count the number of letters involved in the interval that they're referencing, and they would only count and then the interval would be the first and the last letters involved. So if I was going to do a fifth and I was going to start on A, I would go A, B, C, D, E. So now I have 5 letters. I counted 5 letters, and I can do it on my chart here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So A is the first letter, E is the last letter. So I've counted the 5 letters. When I play the interval, I only play the first letter A and the last letter E. So on my guitar, if I want to play A and E, because we actually have sharps and flats now, it's very useful if you have this tool. It's my chromatic circle that I made. And what I can do is I know that this is the A string. Now I have this memorized already, but I'm going to show you how to do it. The A string is the 5th string. So if I'm starting on A and I want to find E, I can just count how many blocks, because each block is a half step, which is 1 fret. So if I start here and I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, A to E. A to E is 7 half steps. That means if I start here, A, and I play this, E, that is the interval of a fifth. If I play these together at the same time, I can go like this. I can play A. Now remember, I discovered that it was 7 frets. A perfect fifth is 7 frets. So I'm going to start here on A, which is 5, and I'm going to add 7. That would be 12. And if you remember, I have my chart of magic numbers, and the magic numbers are -5 and +7. And the magic numbers allow you to find notes on the adjacent string. So I'm going to start here on 12, and if I go 12 minus 5, I'm going to find 7. So now I can either go 5 and 12, I can go 0 and 7, or I can go 5 and 7 on 2 adjacent strings, and this gives me the interval of a perfect fifth. Now, this perfect fifth interval, we often play both of those notes at the same time, and we call that a power chord. This is my chart. I call it Lou's Music Theory Toolkit. And what I did was I made a list of the names of the intervals and then the number of half steps in the intervals. But it's not that simple. You just can't count the half steps. We can thank Pythagoras for that. He had to make it a little bit difficult. So whenever you're counting the intervals in music, the first thing you have to do is you have to count the letters. The first thing you do is you count the letters. And then the second thing we do is we add a qualifier. And we talked about that. And the qualifier are the words major, minor, diminished, augmented, or perfect. So just a minute ago, I was talking about the perfect fourth and the perfect fifth. So during the time that Pythagoras lived, the perfect fourth and the perfect fifth those were the intervals that were used more than any other interval. They used those in music the most frequently. And it's important to remember during Pythagoras' time, they did not have sharps and flats, and they very rarely sang harmony. As far as we know, whenever they had groups of people singing, they would all sing in unison. They would sing the same note. So they weren't singing multiple different notes at the same time. All right, so Smoke on the Water. Smoke on the Water uses a series of perfect fourth intervals in the riff. So what is a perfect fourth interval? Well, we're pretty far into our interval lessons now, so hopefully you're getting more comfortable with this, that the interval of a perfect fourth is going to have 4 letters. So whatever letter we start on, we can count 4. So the first notes in Smoke on the Water it's a D. So we play the D and the G open at the same time. So if I look at my letter chart up here and I count D to G, I go D, 2, 3, 4. That's 4 D. 4 letters. So that gives us the first step in our interval. 4 letters is going to be a fourth. Now we have the second chart, because when we look at fourths, there's a number of different types of fourths. If we look over here, we have a perfect fourth, and we also have an augmented fourth. So if I follow this over here, the perfect fourth is 5 half steps, and the augmented fourth is 6 half steps. So I always found that this part was a little bit confusing, but if you remember, had we had lived during the time that Pythagoras was alive, that there was no sharps and flats. So they only had the perfect fourth. They could not have the augmented fourth. So if I started, and I start on G, and I count 5 half steps. D, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. D to G. So that gives me my 5 half steps, and I have 5 letters. That's my perfect fourth. So if we wanted to play some perfect fourths on the guitar, the first thing we could do is that we would first start, so this song, it starts on D. So I can find D at the 10th fret of string 6. And I'm going to play, this is fret 10. So if I go fret 10 and I come down here, this is 12, 13, 14, 15. So 10 to 15. That's going to be my perfect fourth. Now, if we use our magic numbers, I'll put this up on the screen. The magic numbers are -5 and +7. We can use that. We can find the same note on the adjacent string. And it works on every string except for string 2. We have to add 1 extra note on string 2, bump it up a fret. So here, if I take 15 and I go 15 minus 5, that will be 10. So this note, 15 minus 5 is 10. So this, those are the same. Those are the same notes. So if I wanted to play a perfect fourth, I could put my finger, you see what I'm doing? I'm putting my finger on fret 10 of string 6 and fret 10 of string 5. And that gives me the perfect fourth. That's the same note that we use whenever we're tuning the guitar. So I'm going to switch to a cleaner guitar tone here. And this, you might recognize this if you've been to a wedding and they played the Wagner's wedding, I can't remember if it's the bridal march, bridal chorus. Wagner's bridal chorus. It's like this, like, or like, the beginning of that is a perfect fourth. A lot of times, if you take ear training classes, I know I took a lot of those at university, and we would learn to recognize the interval of a perfect fourth by comparing it in memory to the sound of the bridal march. So the bridal march, Smoke on the Water, they also have something to do in common with tuning, because if we look at how the guitar is tuned, and this is very important because I've said this with the magic numbers, that if we look at how the guitar is tuned, all the strings on the guitar are tuned in fourths except strings 3 to 2. And you'll hear me reference that the tuning of the guitar is that the strings are not symmetrical. So if we look, this string is E and this string is A. And whenever I was a kid, I can remember a guitar class I took, and the teacher said, Eddie ate dynamite, goodbye Eddie. And that was a little acronym to help me remember the names of the notes. E, A, D, G, B, E. So now, if we look at this, if we go E to A, and we count the number of letters, E, F, G, A. 4. And then we can look at our chart, and I'm going to show this chart one time. Over here on Lou's Music Theory Toolkit, I've written down that the perfect fourth is 5 half steps. So I'm not going to keep pulling that one up. But over here, I can start on E, and I can count 5 half steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And remember, this is the distance traveled. So E to A, that meets our criteria for perfect fourth. The next string, A to D, A to D. So let's count the letters. A, B, C, D. So there's 4 letters. That's good. Let's get our chart. Let's start on A, and let's count the D. 1, 2, 3. So I got start on A. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Perfect fourth. A to D. So the next one's D to G. That sounds like the wedding march. So I count the letters. D, E, F, G. There's 4 letters. Then I come over here to my chromatic circle, and I start on D, and I count 5 half steps. And remember, this is like running. So whenever you're counting the letters, it's like if you were running with your friends, you count every person that's running. But whenever you're counting the half steps, it's like the distance traveled. So if we were going to go running, we went out in front of the building, we stood on the steps, we actually would have to run 1 mile before we would count 1 mile. We wouldn't start on 1. So we start here on D, and we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Distance traveled, D to G. All right, so that gives us, this one's a perfect fourth. That sounds like the wedding march. Here's the A to D. Yeah, that one sounds like the wedding march too. Now this one, D to G, we just figured that one out. That one is also sounds like the wedding march. Now we're on the string 3 and string 2. So we're going to go G to B. So if I count the letters, G, A, B. Oh, we better count those again. G, A, B. There's only 3. So that's why the guitar tuning is weird. It's not symmetrical, because string 3 to string 2 is G to B. And G to B is only 3 letters. So what does that mean? It means it's going to be some type of a third. So now we're going to come over here to G, and we're going to count. We're going to start on G. 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's 4 half steps, and we know it's a third. So now we're going to get our toolkit. This is like our measuring tape. And we got 4 half steps, and that's called a major third. So this interval right here is a major third. Does not sound like the wedding march. If I was to take my index finger, and I use any finger, but I put it on the first fret of string 2, now it sounds like the wedding march. So the last set of strings we have left are strings 2 and 1, and so we have B, and then E. Sounds like the wedding march, but let's do our due diligence and figure it out. So we're going to start on B, we're going to count to E. So go B, C, D, E. 4 letters. So we know it's some kind of a fourth. We come over here, we start on our chart, we find B. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's 5. We've done a whole bunch of these. That's a perfect fourth. So now we've covered perfect fourths on every string. So the next thing we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about perfect fifths. So let's talk about perfect fifths. Perfect fifth is one of the most played intervals on the guitar. Perfect fifth is an interval of 5 letters. If we start on A, and we count 5 letters, A, B, C, D, E, it's going to be A to E. And then we need to have our chart here. We're going to look at this, and we're going to see that the perfect fifth is 7 half steps. So if I start on 5, and I count 7 half steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I go to 12, that's E, A to E. And that's the one that's called the perfect fifth. And we can see this on the open string, if we do the A, that the E is at the 7th fret. This is 2/3 of the string. This is why it's called a perfect interval, because it's actually a fraction of 3 to 2. This part of the string is 3 and this part's 2. So these intervals of the perfect fifth, if we play this at the same time, so I have A and E. So I can do it like this, A, E. If I use my magic numbers and I play A here on string 6, fret 5, and then E is at 12, I can go 12, magic numbers minus 5, and it gets me to 7. So I'm going to do 5 and 7. And this is what we typically call a power chord. At the beginning of this, I was playing Cocaine by Eric Clapton. Turn on my Marshall emulation. So we can find perfect fifths on every string. We can do a power chord. Here's A and E on the 2 thickest strings. I can play these same notes. I can use the A open. Then I can go 7 frets, which is my perfect fifth. I can figure out, how do I find this same note on string 4? I take 7 minus 5. That's a perfect fifth. This is actually the first chord in Highway to Hell by AC/DC. A power chord. So if I go to the 4th string is D, and with D I can count 5 letters, D, E, F, G, A. So I'm going to go D to A, and then I'm going to start on D, and I know this. I know if I go D and I count 7 half steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's, I can move this note. Now that's a power chord, but you'll notice it doesn't sound as powerful, because as the strings get thinner and the pitch gets higher, the chords themselves, they don't have the same sort of like low vibration that we usually think of whenever we play power chords. So the next interval we need to talk about is one that's very controversial. It's the diminished fifth interval. In the diminished fifth interval, during Pythagoras' time, they called it the Diablo in Musica, and it means the devil in music. And during Pythagoras' time, from what I've read, the people believed that if you were composing music where you were playing that interval, that you were trying to summon the devil, and they did not want the devil to be summoned. And so what they would do is they would take the composer that was trying to summon the devil, they would take that composer out into the middle of the village, and they would stone them. So I don't know much about the stoning. I always joke and say I don't know if they would just stone them enough that they wouldn't compose music like that anymore, or if they would stone them until they were dead. So but I do know this: people did not like being stoned. We're talking about the kind of stoning where they throw rocks at you. And so what they did is that people invented the very first sharp and flat note actually by accident, because what they were doing was they were just trying to avoid getting stoned. So whenever you play, if you look at this chart right here, this chart has just the regular letters, which we call the natural notes, A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. So whenever you play 5 letters, if you start on A and you go A, B, C, D, E, if I play that, that's a standard power chord. But if I start on B and I go B, C, D, E, F, that's still 5 letters, so that's a 5th. But if I play this, I get that. That is the devil's interval. We call that a diminished 5th, because if we look at our chromatic circle, if we start on B and we count the F, so we start on B, we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's only 6 half steps. So this is the only place where the natural notes, the way that they fall, if you start on B, you cross that naturally occurring half step between B and C, and the naturally occurring half steps between E and F. So it makes this interval shorter. And this is that's the devil's interval. And you know, at the beginning of this video, I was playing. That interval is the interval that makes up the opening part of the song Black Sabbath. It's that diminished 5th. But that interval was also hugely important with helping me understand how the intervals work in music theory. Because I made a discovery by accident that if I started on G and I played this note right here, but if I called it C sharp, and you can see here, look, if I start on G and I come over here and I come to this square, and there's 2 letters in this block right here, C sharp or D flat. So whenever I play this G and then I play the next note, which is fret 4 of string 5, I have to decide, do I want to call that letter C sharp or D flat? Because this particular note is called an enharmonic equivalent. An enharmonic equivalent is whenever you have a pitch or a sound and it can be named by 2 different letters. And so this was always extremely confusing to me, but whenever I learned it in this interval, it made perfect sense. And here's why. Is if I start on G and I go to C sharp. So I'm going to count, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to count the letters. So I go G to C sharp. So I go G, A, B, C. So G to C sharp, that's 4 letters. It's some kind of 4th. I'm going to look at my reference chart, and I'm going to find that the augmented 4th is 6 half steps. So I'm going to come over here, I'm going to start on G, and I'm going to count 6 half steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I come right here, but remember it's got to be 4 letters, so G to C sharp is called an augmented 4th. Now if I play the same thing, that's the G, but this time I call it D flat. So if I go G, A, B, C, D, G to D is 5 letters. And then when I look at my chart over here, to my surprise, that whenever I look at the chart, the diminished fifth, it also has 6 half steps. And I was like, oh my gosh. So this was where I really started to understand how the interval counting worked. Because if I start on G and I come over here and I get to this block and I have a C sharp or a D flat, that if it's a C sharp, it's some kind of a fourth, because there's 4 letters, G, A, B, and C. If I start on G and it's D flat, it's some kind of a fifth, which is the diminished fifth, because there's 5 letters, G, A, B, C, D. And this really opened the door to me understanding how the counting of intervals worked in music theory. There's one interval that we haven't talked about yet. It's called the augmented fifth. And the augmented fifth is 8 half steps. And it is not very common. It's still going to be a fifth. It's a Baby Hold On To Me. So he plays, in that song, he plays a D chord. Like here's a D power chord, and I'm going to raise that A 1 half step. And now I'm going to look at my chart here. And so if I start on D, and we know that if we start on D and we count to A, it's 5 letters. D, E, F, G, A. That's 5. And then we look over here, and our regular perfect fifth is 7 half steps. Well, the augmented fifth is 8 half steps. So if I start here and I count 7 half steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that gets me to A. But if I start here and I count 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 8 gets me to this chart right here, but A sharp, A is 5 letters, B is 6 letters. So the only note that's would be a fifth would be the A sharp. That's an augmented fifth. So that gives us our Eddie Money song. There's also a really famous Juju by Wayne Shorter. It uses an augmented fifth. That's a lot more obscure song. There's also a famous jazz song that I really like that uses the perfect fifths. Who knows that song? That song's 4 on 6 by the great Wes Montgomery. The whole beginning of the intro is just a series. He goes G, and then he goes up a fifth, and then he goes to C, up a fifth. So it's like G, G5, C5, G5, C5, G5, G. Then he goes G, C5, F5, B flat 5, E flat 5, A flat 5, B 5, and then it goes up a half step. E flat 5, and then A flat 5, and then he plays this really cool, let's see. That's the chords, yeah. B flat major 7, G minor 7, and then he does an 11th chord, I think, A flat minor 11, slides up a half step. So I hope everybody is still hanging in there. I always do videos on Saturday afternoon. Hopefully, if you like my videos, like and subscribe. My original goal was to get 300 subscribers, and I'm way past 300 subscribers, and I can't tell you how excited I am. I appreciate so much everybody liking and subscribing. If you like my lessons and you have some ideas about things you'd like me to explain, leave me some comments. I'll try and do those. I have tons of lesson ideas that I'm working on that I'm super slow at the editing, and you can probably tell I don't have a lot of high-tech technology. I'm just recording on my phone to make the videos. So if my channel continues to grow, and if someday I ever become monetized, one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to buy a really good camera. Well, not a really good camera, just a better camera. And then, but if you want to take lessons with me in person, I live in the Cincinnati area. I teach in northern Kentucky and in Cincinnati. And if you want to do online lessons, I have that technology. I do Zoom lessons every week. I have a really good webcam. All you need is fast internet. So you can find my information on my website. Here we're going to wrap it up really quick. That this is what we covered today. We covered perfect fourths, which is the intervals of how the guitar's tuned. For ear training, we hear that a lot with Here Comes the Bride. If you remember, Smoke on the Water also uses perfect fourths. We covered perfect fifths. These are some of the most common intervals used on guitar. Power chords. I forgot to mention this. A power chord technically is not a chord, because the definition of a chord is 3 or more notes sounded simultaneously, and a power chord only has 2 notes. So a power chord is a slang term. It would be a dyad is the correct term for that. And then the last interval we talked about the diminished fifth, which is also called an augmented fourth. And sometimes it's called the tritone because it's 3 whole steps and it's exactly halfway in the middle of the octave. All right, I have some earlier videos where I tried to explain overall understanding intervals, and I have a video where I covered major and minor seconds. I have a video where I covered major and minor thirds. I have a video that I finished last week that I haven't edited yet, where I demonstrate linear arpeggios, which linear arpeggios are made up of major and minor thirds because that's the building block of all chords. Chords are built by stacking thirds. Interestingly enough, when you stack 2 thirds, you get a perfect fifth. It's the way they came up with this stuff, it's very unusual. But if we looked at this really quick, if we played A, and we played the perfect fifth, which is the 7th fret, which is E, and then I played A, and I played a major third, which I covered this a couple weeks ago. A major third is 4 half steps, so I go. That's the sound of a major third. And from here, I played a minor third, which is 3 half steps. Those three notes make up a major chord, and oftentimes we see this written and people don't explain it at all, but it's A, C sharp, E, and A to E is a fifth. A, B, C, D, E. Well, A to C sharp is a third. A, B, C sharp, C is 3. I always thought it seems so weird because if you do a major third and a minor third, how do you get a fifth? Well, this is why. If you do a major third and a minor third, you actually count the C twice. Because if I go A to C sharp, A, B, C sharp, that's 3 letters. If I start on C sharp and go C sharp, D, E, that's E is the fifth, but it's 3 letters because I counted the C sharp twice. Trust me, I know how confusing this is. So, hopefully I'm doing a good job of explaining it. Please like and subscribe my videos. Leave me some nice comments. And And that's going to be a wrap for today. All right.